especially I'd like to welcome those friends of ours who literally got here hours ago, moving across cultural boundaries and being jet-lagged into cyberspaces. I'm glad that they're here, even though it'll take a while, I'm sure, for them to be with us in reality rather than virtual reality. Today's conference is one of the gatherings in preparation for the Beijing +5. We took advantage of this particular moment so that many of you who come for the longer gathering would be here with us. Just to put our work in perspective, it would be nice to look at the Beijing event in some kind of a process rather than as one momentous happening. We spent many, many years, those of us here in the room and also those on the podium, have actually gone through a number of gatherings throughout these years, many of them international UN gatherings, that put women's issues from that separate and segregated and side issue into the mainstream. At Cairo, we were able to put it on the books that we have a right over our own bodies. At Habitat, we brought it out that in order to have full participation of women, we have to redesign cities, homes, communities. At the Human Rights Conference, we were able to put on record something that should have been common knowledge, but fortunately is now, that women's rights are human rights. And by the time that, through these and many other conferences, we were able to talk about women's issues as something whole and interrelated and connected to all other issues that the human race faces, we got to Beijing, and we had the largest gathering, in the international gathering in human history. And the major thing that we came out with, aside from the important consensus document, was the central theme of empowerment of women and ensuring the leadership of women in reaching empowerment, because all of the other 12 areas of concern, in fact, are going to be facilitated if we do have the empowerment, and not capable of being reached if we don't have. So in some ways, we have come a long way through these years and through Beijing. And now 5 years after, when we look at our situation, we see that we still are facing major problems. We still have 3/5 of the 4.4 billion women living in developing countries with no access to basic sanitation, 1/3 without safe drinking water, 1/5 beyond reach of modern health services, and 1/5 of the children who don't get to grade 5. And we know that about of the 70% of the poorest people on the face of the earth who live on less than $1 a day, the 70% are women, and we know that half of the 855 million illiterates in the world, more than 70% of those are women. So there's a long list of these figures and realities that we can look at. But we also have an extraordinary set of factual situations that we can deal with and build upon. One is that this whole process leading to Beijing brought about a network of women activists working together in solidarity, which is a wonderful, rich, diverse group with a huge amount of energy, and that is a wealth of resources that we can build upon. The other is that we have defined our needs and our aspirations, especially with regards to empowerment. We're looking at empowerment and leadership in new ways. We have discovered together that we're not talking about leadership in the sense of a given set of situations in which we want to lead equally with men, but that we want to change the entire nature of leadership to deal with creation of shared meaning, shared goals, shared aspirations, in which everybody works together toward commonly defined goals. And this is something that is new in the world. It's something that women have brought to the table. The most extraordinary other thing that has happened, and that is the subject of our conference today, is that the information revolution that has happened, the fastest growing explosion of communications means in the history of the human race, this is something that has brought about a whole new set of possibilities and potentials. It has opened doors for people to instantaneously and inexpensively to communicate with each other. It has opened doors so that the networking that we have done as women in more cumbersome ways can now be shared in much more, in a lot easier and inexpensive ways. And also, it has brought out the possibility for the first time that the international dialogue can be interacted with and can include people with a variety of voices. Now, the problem is, however, that so few people from the disadvantaged groups are participating in this. And what we want to do is to try to find ways to bring in others, to bring in not only huge numbers of women, but also the other disadvantaged peoples who are not now in this international dialogue and are not now benefiting from the possibilities of this communications revolution. Just looking at the figures, there are 300 million or so internet users in the world, and 110 of them, 110 million are in the United States. 70% of all internet users are in Europe and North America. The Middle East, for instance, has only 2 million users of the internet, and only 4% of those are women. And of course, we have a huge discrepancy even among the small portion of women who are using the internet. Those are people who are more advantaged, live in urban areas, and have the resources to be able to use this extraordinary tool. So one of our main objectives is to be able to bring this extraordinary tool to everyone, especially to women and in the developing world, and to do that, not simply to bring this tool, the technical aspect of it, which is rather easy really in the long run, but to bring with it content, to bring with it the kind of culturally relevant, locally produced materials that will have some meaning for the peoples of the developing world. And that, of course, relates to the question of empowering women and of building leadership. This can be a tool for empowering women that has not been equaled in history. It is a tool that allows interactiveness. It allows for people to determine their own wishes, their own aspirations, their own priorities, and their own ways of learning and teaching. And it is also a tool that can leapfrog a whole lot of issues that we've had before. For instance, until even a couple of years ago, we were completely overwhelmed with the question of infrastructure, of telephone wires, of hundreds of thousands of villages in countries such as India, where there had never even been a telephone, let alone computers, and how to deal with this problem when you're connecting, when you're networking, when you're trying to learn and teach. Now, of course, we have the possibility that with the use of satellite, we can leapfrog these, not to avoid the building of infrastructure, but to facilitate, to mobilize people to build infrastructure. So in the final analysis, it is not the question of bread or computers or all these other services or computers, but the use of this wonderful tool in terms of building the possibility to work for development and for participation. And also to get a world which is not one-sided. 80% of all websites are in English, only less than 10% of the people of the world have that as their main language. So we want voices, diverse cultural input from around the world coming into setting global priorities and the global dialogue. So today we are going to be hearing from some extraordinary women from around the world, and especially from Middle East, North Africa, who are going to be discussing the ways and means of doing this. We're going to begin with the panel, who is going to be contextual, and we're going to go on to a best practices panel that will demonstrate some ways in which people have used multimedia, different levels of sophistication of the media, in order to mobilize women. And we're going to end with the final panel that will bring personal experiences of leaders from the Muslim world in terms of how they have developed their leadership capacities, how they have dealt with the impediments, and what potential and what resources they have used for their leadership. I would like to now turn to our facilitator for this morning's conversation, Shazia Rafi, who is the Executive Director of Parliamentarians for Global Action. You have a little sketch of her long and wonderful history of activism in your book, so I won't say much more, except that her organization is one of the first that paid attention to this particular means of communication and has a wonderful program on involving women in the use of information technology. And then we go on to our opening speaker, Nolene Heiser, whom Shazia will tell you a little bit about, and I'm very honored and glad to have all of these wonderful speakers here today opening our dialogue. Thank you very much.
My job is fairly easy. I think I just have to set the context of women's political leadership and then hand it over to Nolene and the others. I think there are some statistics that are in your packets on political leadership of women. It's a fairly abysmal picture except for a few countries. Focusing on cabinet ministers, cabinet parliaments, etc. We are nowhere near the percentage that we are in the population. Our organization started working along with others during the period leading up to Beijing to focus on how to get more women into the political decision-making sphere, which is defined from everything from local councils up to parliament and government. I must say, within our own institution, we did make quite a lot of progress. From Beijing till now, we went up from having something like 12% women within our membership to now 27%. We are the first and so far only parliamentary association to have a woman as Secretary General. And that was done specifically as an action to implement Beijing. And women members of parliament within our organization have held every portfolio, including portfolios of nuclear disarmament, peacekeeping, etc., and not confined to the social development sphere. We started looking at the internet communications issue when, in our work post-Beijing, we realized that women members in parliaments needed to be made more effective in the work that they do, both nationally as well as linked with each other. Initially, we went the old-fashioned way. We published a bulletin of what initiatives women were taking when they were in parliament, sort of the other side of the picture. First picture was how do you get them into parliament. The second was once they're there, what do they do? Do they actually put forward initiatives of legislation that answer the needs of their women constituents? Specifically, are they implementing the Beijing Platform of Action, and what kinds of resolutions, initiatives, laws, bills, etc. are they putting forward? That turned out to be an enormous success because our members started saying, can you give us information on such and such area of work? We want to know what other countries are doing in terms of legislation, because rather than reinventing the wheel, it would be great if we could at one spot access information on domestic violence legislation, information on economic empowerment legislation, etc. So we then approached one of our foundations to, on a pilot basis, help us set up an online legislative initiative center, which will be launched on June 9th during the Beijing +5 meetings, and which has the support of both Ford Foundation and UFM. And we, in the pilot phase, have put up legislation put forward by women from 6 countries. And in those 6 countries are some of the usual candidates like Sweden, but there are also candidates from other countries, Ghana, and a few others from, spread across the world. It is not completely comprehensive as yet because we are looking to not only members of parliament but women's activist groups to let us know what legislation is being introduced, what is still on the floor, what hasn't yet passed, because we're looking at it in a very broad way. Not what succeeds, but every effort that is made. And we hope that this is something that not only women members of parliament will use, but that others who work with parliament, who work to push parliament, who